had a doctor tell me that I'd actually broken my neck and drowned, that I'd never walk again. It literally felt like my life was over in that moment.
Welcome to this week's Escape Your Limits podcast. Today, we're speaking with an inspiring expert on resilience. At 12 years old and with a sporting career ahead of her, she had a life-changing accident that left her quadriplegic and dependent on a wheelchair for life. At the time, she felt like her world had ended, but over time, she came to see that the accident was the best thing that could have ever happened to her. She knows more than most of us about overcoming adversity and seeing every obstacle as an opportunity. How do you conquer life's impossible challenges? Why is resilience more important now than ever? How can you enjoy facing an ever-changing world? Well, today's guest has the answers to all of these questions and more. So please welcome resilience expert, keynote speaker, and author of How to Be Resilient, Miss Stacey Copas, to the Escape Your Limits podcast.
So Stacey, thank you. Thanks so much for joining me today. It's a little bit of a different interview than what we've done before. And we organize these podcasts. It's a business predominantly, and we talk to a lot of businesses. And so my wife is the one that sort of organizes and manages the directions for the guests. And so I'll kind of put some together, and my wife does some. And so this one in particular is one that she uncovered, and she's a big fan, and she asked me to sort of just to tell you that. But it's a very different story, and it's an extremely inspiring story. But it was one when I started sort of probably about a week ago, started to watch a lot of your YouTube videos, which are great. It was one that I found also quite difficult to sort of I suppose you sort of get involved in the guests and the guest story, and I found this one difficult. And don't take that in a bad way, but difficult and also extremely inspiring in terms of what you've done. So firstly, I'd just like to thank you for joining us today.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. I've been very much looking forward to this.
So look, what I would like to do to start is I kind of started reading your book, and I found this quote. I'm not sure whether it was one of yours or Bruce Lee's, because you seem to be a bit of a fan of Bruce Lee from reading the book. But I'll read it out, and it says, "Anyone can give up. It's the easiest thing in the world to do. But to hold it together when everyone else would understand if you fell apart, that's true strength." How did that? Is that one of your quotes? And if not, how did why was that an important quote for your book?
Oh, look, it actually isn't one of my quotes, and I searched high and low, and I could not find like anyone to attribute it to. But I think that was something that really resonated with me, is that I think that externally a lot of people look at someone going through a challenging time, and I think they almost make excuses for us and give us almost give you that free pass to go, well, oh, look, I completely understand if, that this is difficult. And I in your situation, I would probably totally give up, and I would totally find this overwhelming. But I just really feel that it's the times where you are in the deepest of the struggle, and you do push through, and you do grow through it. And I think that's where we become stronger. And that was, just as I said, a quote just really resonated with me when I was popping the book together.
Yeah. The other thing that I particularly liked, and this comes up quite a lot in all kinds of trainings and presentations that we do as a company, is you mentioned, I probably not got it exactly, but you say, yes, I know that, but am I doing that? And I guess in your experience, is that something that you've found where, we all know a lot of these principles, they're not necessarily new, but, probably sort of embodying them. And we talked off camera about rituals. Do you, in your experience, is the difference between knowing and doing a big jump?
Oh, it is, and it's something that if I'm doing a keynote, it's something I actually frame in the beginning of my talk. Is I say that that really there's nothing new that I'm going to share, but and I talk about the power of simplicity. And the thing with simplicity is often then people will go, yeah, I know that, and just write it off. So that's where I get people to, I challenge people, and I say, well, look, if you find yourself at any time from, in that room or that point forward in their lives saying, yeah, I know that, then actually stopping and stopping and asking themselves, well, am I doing that? And knowing and recognizing there's a huge difference between knowing and doing. Asking themselves, could they do it differently? Could they do it better? And then also remember that sometimes we need to hear the same messages over and over again, either at different times in our lives or from a different messenger in order for that to land. Because so often we hear something and we know it's not new, but in that moment it suddenly has incredible power and it becomes something that we may take on. So it's something that I really like to emphasize, because I think we have a tendency to overcomplicate things, and sometimes we might look at something and go, oh, but it can't be that simple. And it's like, well, it is. And so it is. It's just really challenging people to be more open-minded, and even if they think they're hearing something they've heard 1,000 times before, just to really just go, well, okay, yeah, could I do it different? Could I do it better? Could I apply it in a different area of my life? And then just be open-minded that, it might just be that time and that messenger in order for that to land for them at that time.
Yeah. Do you think sometimes, and I guess this applies to all areas of life, do you think sometimes people feel that if it is if they want to achieve something in particular, then if it's too simple, it's almost like, well, yeah, that can't be that straightforward, and expect it to be something other than, yeah, you've just got to put in the work and you've got to do this on a regular basis to sort of get where you are.
It is a lot of that. And that's the thing with when we were talking about rituals, is that they are really, really simple things, but it is the power of doing them consistently and repetitively. And what I liken it's not dissimilar to, how you build physical fitness, is that, you go to the gym or you have an exercise program and you're doing things that, are quite simple movements, but you're doing them repetitively, you're doing them consistently, and it is that use it or lose it thing. You do have to keep at it. It's not like, oh, okay, you can work out on one program for a month and suddenly then that's all you need to do for the rest of your life. And that's what I find with resilience, and a lot of things that come, that are foundational things for people to be successful. It comes down to the discipline and the consistency to keep doing it, even though it feels boring. It's like even like when someone's starting to, I've been taking singing lessons recently, and it's some of the, doing the simple stuff, like it might be just doing some of the warm ups. I hate warming up, but because we just want to get in and sing. But it is having to do some of those scales, and it's having to do some of the really, really basic stuff. And it's getting those, mastering the simple stuff is what then leads to being able to be successful. And but just recognizing we just have to keep doing that, even if it is boring and even if we think it's we're beyond it.
So, your story is interesting, and I'm going to come on to it in a moment. But I've reading your book, How to Be Resilient, and how to get results when things don't go to plan. I guess we're in probably the where we are today, or certainly recently, seems as though this book was written for now. How long ago did you write it, and what was the inspiration in terms of writing specifically about resilience?
I actually started writing the book. I wrote an ebook version. I think it was about 2012, 13, and it was just a framework. What I had done through working with a couple of mentors and coaches, I just reverse engineered like how I had turned my life around from the biggest challenges I'd had, the lowest of the lows, and how I'd been able to achieve the things I had done at that point, and how I was actually moving forward with that. And it was a coach that actually put the word resilience to what I do, because it wasn't a word I'd used. It's not a word that I'd heard anyone sort of talk about. And when she said, look, when we sort of unpacked, my story, and then once I sort of like needing to know that I can have a great story, but in order to be able to impact people, I needed to be able to teach people through that story. So it was going, okay, well, how did I do that? And I just unpacked it, and I'm like, okay, what did I do consciously and unconsciously over the previous decades to get to that point? And that was how that came about. But I was much like a lot of entrepreneurs, is that I made sure I sold it first and wrote it and finished writing it later, because I think that's where, we have a tendency to sort of think that everyone around us goes, this is a great idea. And then people put a lot of effort into actually building something completely and then realizing that people don't put money to it. So that's what I did. I did a crowdfund campaign for the book, crowdfunded in 2014, and then finally published and delivered in 2015. So, it's 5.5 years, since it's been printed. But I think that the principles in it are timeless, and we definitely are in a period of life where things certainly aren't going to plan. But I sort of feel that life in general doesn't go to plan. It doesn't matter whether it's business or whether it's your personal life, your relationships, your family. We can set out with great intentions and we can set goals, but the most important thing is being able to have that ability to stick to it when it doesn't go to plan. And I think that's when a lot of people get stuck, is that they've got the 100-point plan, step by step, but if one of those little things fall over, then they're a mess and they don't know what to do next. So that's where resilience has become incredibly powerful, both in in business and in life in general.
I think that's a great point. One of the things that we hear a lot in the podcast and talk a lot in business is about goal setting, and I think in some cases people kind of get a little bit confused with it. I know I certainly did, and you kind of think, okay, set your 1, 2, 3 long-term goals, and you kind of get quite attached to them. And I suppose what I found, at my age, is that you kind of have a direction. And my father always used to say that you may kind of go in that area, but there may be things that come up on the way, that stepping stones that take you to something that's better than you could have imagined at the time. And it's something it's a very difficult thing to sort of get your head around and to be almost like satisfied that you're moving forward. But it's definitely a statement you've got to take very carefully, so that you're going in the right direction, but you're not getting too attached to where you think you should be. In your case, take us back to the sort of, when you were, I guess, a young girl, prior to your accident, and what, because you were, from a young age, it sounded as though you were quite ambitious and you kind of had your life figured out at that point. So what were some of the goals, and what did your life look like prior to that moment? Where were you going, and what were some of the things that you wanted to do when you got older?
Yeah, I was probably a little bit of a rare young person in that I knew before I even started school what I wanted to do with my life, and all I wanted to do was be a vet. So that was it. And so once I'd started school, then the goal was to do whatever it took to follow that dream. So and just before I'd had my injury, I was coming to the end of primary school here in Australia, and my goal was to get into a selective agricultural college for my secondary schooling, because I thought that was the best place to be able to go really, really deep into agriculture and the sciences, which would then set me up for that path to become a vet. And yeah, I had I'd gotten into that school. I passed the exams. I got an offer first round, and I'd done the orientation. I got my uniforms, and I was well and truly set as far as that goes. And I was incredibly happy that was the biggest goal for probably the primary school years, was to get into that school, and then it was to move forward from there. Aside from that, I'd always been really into sports, and I was a pitcher in the softball team in summer, and undefeated in that last year of school. And I also was one of the first 2 girls. A good friend and I ended up, after quite a lengthy battle with our school, became the first 2 girls to ever play soccer for our school. And that was like 32 years ago. So yes, it must be like yesterday. And so that was something that, looking how far women's sports comes now, that's really exciting to know that we were probably some of the early trailblazers back then. And I was obsessed with running. So I actually represented my school at every distance, from the 100 meters right through to the cross country. and it was an obsession. So, between athletics and the academic pursuits, I was very focused, and I trained and I did all that sort of stuff, and that was good. And then I had normal family, great friends. I was pretty confident that I was clear on what I wanted to do. I was taking the steps to make it happen, and I was well on track.
So tell us about what happened, because I know after this, I heard an interview with you where you said, that particular situation, now when you look back on it, was probably one of the best things that happened to you. I believe that was how you described it, which was very difficult, to sort of even understand how, you were able to sort of, explain that. But why don't you sort of share the story, if you wouldn't mind, and kind of what happened and how, and just sort of paint the picture for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was the 2nd of December 1990, and I was visiting a relative's place, somewhere I was very familiar with. And on this day, I was there with my younger brother, who was 10. There's a couple of other younger boys there. They were sort of similar age to my brother. And as I did every time I visited this relative's place, we were out in their backyard swimming pool. And for me, I didn't want anything to do with the boys. And every time I was there, I just used to climb up on the edge of the pool and dive in. And so this was a pool that was like an above ground pool. So it wasn't one of your, built in where you had a deep end or anything like that. It was just basically built for cooling off. And so I just kept climbing up on the edge and diving in, and it didn't go unnoticed. I was getting yelled at to stop. But I think we all remember what it's like to be 12 and bulletproof and invincible. So I was like completely ignored those requests to stop. And then there was one particular time that I was standing there, and I thought that I was splashing too much as I was diving in. So I just hesitated before I dived in, and I thought, well, okay, what can I do to make a perfect dive without splashing? So I thought, in theory, if I was to hold my feet together and keep my legs straight, then I thought that would make a nice clean entry into the pool. So I decided to do that. I took a deep breath and I did exactly that. And it felt like any other dive until I went to try and swim up to the surface, and I found I couldn't move. So I was completely conscious. I didn't feel like anything had gone wrong. I wasn't in any pain, but I couldn't move. So I was holding my breath. Panic set in very quickly, desperately thinking, how can I get the attention of my brother, which I couldn't do. I couldn't move, I couldn't scream, I couldn't do anything. And so there was just, I got to the point where I realized I just couldn't hold on anymore. And there was that split second of sheer terror as I realized that I had to give in. And as I then breathed in and my lungs filled with water, I blacked out. Eventually my brother and the others realized that something was wrong, and they, raised the alarm for help and was pulled out. And so it ended up being, I was taken to the local hospital via ambulance. I was then airlifted to a second hospital by helicopter, and then I was taken to a third hospital. And it was late at night at that hospital in intensive care that I had a doctor tell me that I'd actually broken my neck and drowned, that I'd never walk again. So to me, like it literally felt like my life was over in that moment. And yeah, it felt like a death sentence at the time.
Yeah. What was at that time, going back then, what would you say was your biggest fear then? I guess, we all have fears of many different things, particularly like this, but what, when you were there after that, what was the sort of main thing that you were worried or scared about?
Yeah, it was interesting because I think for me, I was just, I was angry, I was scared, I was all of those things. But the big things that bothered me the most is that I couldn't play sports anymore. I couldn't walk, let alone run or do any of those things. I think one of the biggest things was, and it's like, as a 12-year-old girl, I was like, geez, boys are never going to be interested in me again. That was a huge thing that really bothered me. And also it was just, in that moment, I'd sort of gone from being this really fiercely independent and active young woman to then being dependent on others for absolutely everything. So there was that complete loss of privacy and dignity and all of those things. That's like I couldn't scratch my head. I couldn't turn the page of a book. I couldn't do anything for myself. And so yeah, it was just that sense of feeling like in that short period of time when I was I ended up having to be on bed rest, flat on my back with sandbags either side of my head for 8 weeks after that injury. And I sort of felt that very quickly. I felt like the whole world had seen me naked. I'd felt like the whole world had seen, every bit of me, and it was almost like it was that sort of fear. It's like of wow, it's almost like I don't really have anything left anymore. So, and spending 8 weeks flat on your back, unable to move, you definitely have a lot of time to think. And they were the things that were really kicking around in my head at that time.
So what with that sort of period of I guess being in hospital and almost, because I guess there must have been so many, sort of reorganizing everything almost in your life, the basic things like just eating and getting dressed and all those simple things to kind of like who you are in life. What would you say was probably some of the sort of bigger things that that I suppose that you were spending time thinking about, or trying to figure out in your own mind, kind of where was that sort of starting point once you kind of realized, look, this is my life now?
I think the most difficult part is that it's like my whole identity had been completely smashed, because I identified as an athlete. I identified as, someone that was working towards being a vet. And, the two biggest parts of my life had just been completely taken away in a sense. So I was not able to go to that school that I worked so hard to get to go to. And I wasn't able to do the sports. So there was definitely, for quite a period of time there was a lot of anger and resentment and frustration, and that was all directed at myself, because it's like, well, I was in this situation because of my own actions. But there was just this real sense of like, what's the point? What's the point now? Because that was all I ever wanted to do. So, it took many years to get past all of the, all of that anger and the identity piece, because I think, at that age, we're all trying to figure out who we are and what's our place in the world, and we're, wanting to, desperately fit in with people and all that sort of stuff, and to then, go from being that person that was, I was, pretty much I was liked and I was part of different groups and stuff like that, to then feeling like I had to start from scratch was really difficult. And, I sought some pretty unhealthy ways of dealing with that. And, I spent a great deal of my teenage years drunk and stoned. And that was I look at it in hindsight as creating moments of artificial happiness. But unfortunately that sort of led to deeper pits in between. So it was a pretty rough time then, trying to work out, well, who am I? Where do I fit in? And what am I going to do? What's the point? Do I even want to be here? Was a big one.
Yeah. Did you, was there any blame? And if so, were you blaming yourself? Were you blaming others? Was that something that you went through your mind during that period?
Yeah, there was definitely a lot of that, and that was all directed at myself, because I really had no one else to blame. It was, I was being told not to. I knew that it was something that I wasn't meant to do. It was. I just, it was just something that I'd done, and I had to live with that. But it's. I don't know what's worse, I don't know what's worse, having something external to blame, or, or blaming yourself. But, I learned a lot in the process, and now I've realized that the starting point of anything is taking responsibility for, our situation. And that's why, it's the first principle in the book, because I feel that that's something, if we're in a situation that's difficult, we need to own it. And sometimes it's not just about owning the situation. It's just about making it, finding a solution for it rather than focusing on the problem. And I think that's the thing, is when we dwell on the problem, I think I like call it blamatitis, or that people become excusiologists, and that all it does is it just creates a negative attachment to it, and you get deeper and deeper into it, and you also then you're giving away your power, you're giving away control to something other than yourself. So it was then having to this take ownership of that and going, well, look, I can't change what had happened. I can't change exactly what my physical situation was at the time, but I could change how I felt about it. I could change the story I told about it, and I could change what I did next. And that was a massive shift.
Mm. You mentioned on one of your interviews that you got to the stage where you wanted to take your life. What was the sort of, what was the moment it got to to sort of get you in the state where you said, okay, look, that's it. What was almost like a tipping point, because it sounded as though you got pretty close and very close to the edge by all accounts.
Yeah, I absolutely did, and I've reflected on it since, and I realised that while the circumstances in the lead up to that point were pretty blurry, the moment itself was pretty clear, and it was just this complete sense of despair and hopelessness that again, then what was the point? And then being so close to that, and the only thing that had stopped me in that moment was the fear that someone would find me before I was gone and I'd end up worse than what I was. And that moment scared the heck out of me. It's the kind of thing that I think we hear of other people having experiences like that, and I think people are very quick to judge as well, because people sort of think, well, what can be that bad or that desperately wrong that people see that as the only option? And so it definitely scared me that I found myself in that place. And yeah, that was a moment where I had to then that I did make that shift. And it was real. But if I had a guarantee in that moment that it would have been final, then I probably wouldn't be here today. And that terrifies me today, to think that, really that, the last, 25 years or so, which have been incredible, there was a chance that may have never have happened. But yeah, and I never told anyone about it. Like, it was no one ever knew that I had that moment until I wrote my book. And even then I sort of only just touched on it, because it's something that I don't focus on. But I realized in hindsight that, at that time, while I'd physically drowned once, I was emotionally drowning every single day. And I guess that just came to a point where it really just was overwhelming, and it was just too much. But, from that moment, it was just, I'm like, okay, this is a moment that I've had, and I'll just keep that to myself, which I did for almost everything. And then I just started to just move forward. But it still took many years after that to get to the point where I actually become grateful for what had happened. And that was the biggest shift. And it was really changing that story. And it was like, okay, I looked at it and I said, look, rather than letting it ruin my life, I thought, I'm choosing now to make my life better. And, when I was able to be grateful for it, then it shifts from a perspective of everything's a problem to an abundance of possibility. And that was really powerful. And most people think, how the heck can ending up a quadriplegic and needing a wheelchair for the rest of your life be positive? But, when people spend time with me, they quickly realize that I'm really grateful. I'm happy with, my life. There's been huge challenges, but for the most part, I've had the opportunity to do incredible things that I can say with absolute certainty that I would never have done had my life had taken the path I'd chosen and, possibly been an athlete and ending up a vet. Like, it's been incredible what I've been able to do. And that's because I've opened up to possibilities rather than saying that it's all hopeless.
So, what you've been through compared to a lot of the problems that many of us have, which pale into insignificance, it's totally different. And I guess it's sort of a bit of a reality check. But my guess is the process is very similar. In terms of that sort of rebound that happened to you, what were some of those key, I suppose, I don't know what's the best word, but key points, and the sequence of those events that helped you sort of turn the situation almost on its head and to start to rebuild your life. And because I think it would be useful for many of us to sort of really, understand kind of what you did and how you even sort of changed many of your beliefs about, your life, your identity. So what kind of came first, and what were some of those other sort of milestones that were important in who you've become today?
Yeah, definitely gratitude was the biggie, and even today it still is. The ability to look around and be not so much look for things to be grateful for, but just experience a state of gratitude. So I literally out loud say thank you for things all the time, whether it's to myself, whether it's to others. But that was the big thing is the gratitude piece. And I think when you shift to a state of gratitude, then as I said, it opens up possibility. And again, gratitude's one of those things where people go, oh, that's just too simple, but it is incredible when you actually do say thank you for things. And I use mantras rather than than writing a gratitude journal or anything like that. And because I find that, gratitude, mantras are something that's simple, controllable, takes like 10 seconds, 15 seconds. And again, you create the same experience with something that is a lot easier to do, and there's no excuses not to do it. So I do that.
Just on that mantras, Stacey. So when you're saying those, is that is that sort of a verbal thing? Is that like are you creating pictures? Is it an emotional thing? How do you is there a way of doing that that's more effective than other ways? Have you found?
Yeah, I think the just saying it, no matter how you say it, sometimes like just to get started, it's one of those things. But I find that the biggest shift is that if you actually smile as you're saying it, I've been really surprised the power of physically smiling, even if you're by yourself, you're having a really shit time of it or anything like that, but just actually smiling, how it changes your physiology. Because in the last couple of years, I've started to use music and movement as a ritual, and I found that if I'm using movement, and often I use that with music, so I'll dance like an idiot when no one's around. But then I find, and it's like, okay, that gets a certain level of vibration and endorphins going. But then if you actually add the smile to it, and the same with the gratitude, it is just incredible how it exponentially grows the impact of that. So I think that's the biggie. I think probably not trying to do too much with it, because I think sometimes if it's using your mantra and then trying to visualize and then trying to do something else, I think just stripping it back to the absolute basic is say the mantra.
What is a mantra? Is it a private thing, or is it something you'd be happy to share?
Yeah, absolutely love to share. And it's funny because it started out as a self-love thing, which felt so wanky, but it was so wanky, but then it evolved into this. So I'm very grateful that I started with that intention. But the mantra that I use now is I say, thank you for the opportunity to be who I am, where I am, with what I have at this moment in time. So it's thank you for the opportunity to be who I am, where I am, with what I have at this moment in time. And it brings you back into the moment. It's not looking for things to be grateful for. It's just saying thank you for all of it. And I use that. It's the last thing I say to myself when I fall asleep of a night. So I'm in bed, pull the covers up, I close my eyes, and I say that to myself with a smile. And it's the first thing I say to myself when I wake up in the morning. So the alarm goes off, I stop the alarm, and I say that to myself before I get out of bed. And in the course of the day, if I find myself in a moment where I'm feeling really flat, I'm feeling stuck, I might be overwhelmed and struggling to make a decision, then again, I'll take a moment 10 seconds, say that to myself, bring myself in the moment. And it's just incredible how it just completely shifts the energy. And again, it opens it up. It opens up to possibility. And I think what I found the most powerful is using it particularly to bookend the day, because often we can go to sleep with a lot of worry on our minds. And I find that if that's the last thing I think about as I fall asleep, then my brain's in gratitude mode for the night. That's the program it's running. And that's been an incredible shift for me.
So, and now with, like, I guess like all of us, you still have things to worry about and that. But what, are those things different? And do you have a different perspective on when something comes up that's challenging in your life now?
Yeah, it's I might be a little bit weird in the fact that I actually look forward to challenges now. I think that's the thing is I think once you realize how much challenges help us grow, and it's only through discomfort that we experience growth. And again, not dissimilar to how you would do that through physical fitness as well. It takes physical discomfort in order to grow and become stronger physically. And life's like that as well. So I actually seek out challenges, and if things come my way, the more that I feel scared about doing them, the more likely I am to say yes, because I know that it's been every time I've said yes to something that scared me, it's opened up an incredible level of growth, or incredible new network of people, or a new skill, a new business opportunity, a new relationship. So I think that's the thing is it's recognizing that challenges are always going to be there. And again, if you can actually shift your perspective on challenges, then for me, like my vision is a world where people start to see obstacles as opportunities and problems as possibilities. And I think the biggest thing in a moment when there is a challenge is just to stop and go, where's the opportunity in this? And what can I learn from this? And not being afraid of challenges. And like I still have days, like I think sometimes people look at me and go, wow, you're this most resilient person I know, but it just must be so easy for you. And it's like, no, I still work at this stuff every single day. And I have moments where I might get overwhelmed, or I have a few days where it just feels like nothing's working, everything is against me. And usually I'll do a bit of a check-in and I'll realize that I've dropped the ball on my resilience rituals and practices. And, or I haven't checked in with my coaches or my mentors and things like that as well, which, that's a part of the rituals as well, is having, different levels of connection, and, connection with others and is one of them. And working with coaches and mentors is just so crucial for us to have someone outside of us to keep us in line. The challenges never go away. The negative self-talk never goes away.
No.
The imposter syndrome never goes away. But we get much better at dealing with it. We get much better at having a different conversation with those voices. And as far as how to then conquer that better, those conversations we have with ourselves. So gratitude's part of it, but it's also then being very conscious of the language we use in those moments. Because often when we're in a time where we're feeling pressured or we're struggling, we tend to use overly dramatically negative language. And that then actually makes the experience worse than what it is. So if we can be very conscious of the language we use in any moment, and if we can start to describe a situation differently, then we actually have an entirely different experience. As I've learned that the way, how we describe a situation is how we experience it. So rather than going, this is terrible, this is awful, I'm never going to be able to show my face somewhere again because this didn't go to plan. It's like, again, thank you for the opportunity to experience this. This has actually been a really good learning experience. What can I learn from this? What can I do differently? And how can I move forward with this? And, the next level of those dealing with challenges is like, once you've learned a lesson from it, is how can you share it with somebody else? How can you save someone else the grief of, the pain of the experience that you've been through? Like, you've had the pain, but you've grown. How can you then share that with somebody else so that they don't have to, go through the pain to get the learning as well?
I think the language thing is quite powerful. I have a coach, and when I'm sort of going through tough times, it's something that he's mentioned to me a few times. It's something that's unconscious, but when it's pointed out, you're like, okay, I'm probably saying this a lot to myself. How do you check in with yourself in terms of that language? Is it something that you do you just kind of, are you just aware of it and on a regular basis and you pick it up, or do you have anything else that you use to kind of just ensure that that language you're using is serving you and not working against you?
Yeah, I think there is an element of being able to pick it up. The better, the more you do it. But I think the biggest way that I've found has been most beneficial for me to be super conscious of the language I use and to start to reshape it is through journaling. And like journaling has just been probably one of the biggest growth strategies that I've used. I didn't start journaling until I think it was about 8 years ago, and I journaled for about 12, 15 months consistently, and then I dropped the ball a little bit on it. Just for I was inconsistent on it for a little while, but then it was around the time I launched the book that I was talking about it with my audiences, and I'm like, okay, I need to then make sure that I am really solid with this. It's like I'm always really conscious that if I'm asking somebody else to do something, I need to be doing it myself. Mm-hmm. And so it was that sort of check-in. I'm like, okay, back to journaling. And so I'm just about to hit 6 years now of not missing a night of journaling.
Wow.
And yeah, and the power of journaling is that you get the chance to actually get a bit of a capture of your day. And as you're writing and you're reflecting on your day, when you're putting it out on, I use an electronic journal, but as you're doing that, you actually get to then see, well, what are the words? How am I describing the situation? And you get to externalize it, and then you can look at it back, and then you've got the opportunity to go, well, okay, well, is this how I want to experience this? Is this how I want to carry it forward? And you start to see, when you externally see the words you're using, then you can go back and you can rewrite it. And that's what I've found has been really powerful. It's is being able to, you can't change the facts of a situation or the events of what happened, but you can change the experience you have. So you just get better at just consistently getting better at the language you use through that. But also, I think when you start to become aware of the language you're using, you become even more aware of the language that the people around you are using. So, and I find that and that's one of the biggest shifts that I find when I'm talking to people, and especially when they're describing a challenge, is that I can just sort of start to tweak some words with them, and then get them to then sort of then use those words. And it's like, well, okay, how differently does that feel in your body? Does it feel that it's as big an issue as it was before? So you just become very conscious, and then you become conscious of how you speak to others as well. Because that's a big thing, especially if you're a leader. You're a leader, or you're a parent, which I guess a parent is a leader in itself, is it's being very aware of the language that you use and then the impact that it has on the people around you. And so that can make the world a difference. And, it's super powerful, but I find journaling is a great thing to do. A lot of people are a bit intimidated by journaling. They sort of like, oh, I don't know what to write, or I'm not a good writer. But how I started out was I just started out with a commitment to write one sentence every night. And the sentence was just to write about what was the best thing that happened that day. And, if we start to then reprogram ourselves to look for the best things in the day, then we actually start to have less challenges as well, because we start to, you get what you look for. And then that evolved. And now, like the last month or so, most of my evening journals are, between, they're either around 500 words or they're around 1,500 words. Wow. So last night I wrote, it was nearly 1,500 words. And it's just reflection and then reframing is, it's so powerful. And that's the language. It's all a reframe.
Yeah, I like that. I kind of go on and off journaling, but the point you said was quite relevant, and I like the fact that you said you can sort of rewrite it. And I remember when I sort of do it, I'll put something down and then I'm like, actually that doesn't sound nice. So you kind of put more of a positive spin on it. And I guess in some ways you then kind of, it's this sort of I don't know, cycle, then you sort of believe that thing because you've written it. Whereas before, maybe if I didn't write it, that's what's in my head, but I've not sort of visualized it on a piece of paper. So I need to probably start doing that again, particularly when things are a bit tough. Putting it on there and having, I suppose, giving yourself permission that you can rewrite the story however you want because you're the author.
Yeah, and you can rewrite it, but also too, I think once you externalize it, then it gives it a different perspective. And sometimes what goes on and what gets just going round and round and round in our heads, once we actually put it out on paper, it's like, oh, okay, that doesn't seem that bad after all. So I think that there's a lot of power in doing that. And I look at it now, and because sometimes people say to me, it's like, oh, who do you talk to? Do you work with a counselor? Like over the years, have you done all that? And I'm like, no, but I must say that, I think journaling's been, the best experience of that, because I guess essentially I talk to my journal. That's how I get my stuff out. And I used to joke about it, but now I realize it's actually completely true, that I would say journaling has probably saved me tens of thousands of dollars in therapy over the years.
We spoke earlier about rituals and that you may be thinking about doing a book on rituals. Outside of the language, gratitude, and journaling, are there any other important rituals that you've found that have sort of been served you in a positive way?
Yeah, one that I didn't realize was really a ritual and how powerful it was using music. So just the power of music. So and I think, like, if we're going to be specific about how to use music as a ritual, I like to have a bit of a playlist of songs that I can go to if I need to be lifted up. And so I think that's the thing, is I usually ask people when I'm doing my sessions and keynotes and coaching and stuff, is getting people to pick at least one song that they can have on their phone that can be their go-to when they're feeling really, really flat or overwhelmed, that if they just stick their headphones in and move with it, sing along to it, that can, in 3 to 5 minutes completely shifts your energy and your experience of a situation. And then on the flip side, it's having a track that can be the, chill out. If you're feeling overwhelmed, if you're really wired and you're really stressed, then what's a track that can be your go-to where you can actually, potentially sit and close your eyes and just sort of breathe with it, rather than hype yourself up. So I think music is incredibly powerful, and with music it can be, you can just listen to it, you can play it, you can sing, you can dance, you can play an instrument. I think that music is incredibly powerful in so many ways, and I know that it's been a huge part. Like I really didn't give it enough credit until the last couple of years, and I really recognize now that music kept me alive at those lowest points. It was and I was really fortunate actually to be at the lowest points in my life in the in the early to mid 90s, which was the height of grunge, which was the perfect soundtrack, because it was so angsty and angry and screw the world type of thing. So that was really powerful. So there's the music element, and then there's the rituals around connection. So, and I think we've shared, journaling can be that thing about that. That's a good way to connect with yourself. But as far as connection goes, there's rituals to connect with yourself, which I find meditation is a good one. That's also a ritual if you, depending on what your belief structures and your faith is, that can be a way to connect to something bigger than ourselves as well. And then, rituals around connecting with others, and that can be working with coaches and mentors. But it also can be the things like making sure that you schedule into your calendar that you have a date with your partner, that you have regular catch-ups with the people, your friends, that you spend time with your children, that type of thing. So it's just finding rituals around connection. So connection with self, connection with others, and connection with something greater than ourselves. So those are the main ones that I do. And then also exercise is a really big one, for me. And that's probably, I've become committed to that a lot more recently, and I'm sort of in my 8th week now of exercising 6 days a week, which I'd never done any more than 2 or 3 days a week previously, and that's been really transformational. And I think what's great when you commit to something as a ritual, you get to the point where you don't want to break the chain either. And it just feels really good. And sometimes that sort of has been for me at the expense of meditation for a while, but it was something that I probably needed to do something more physical, and then I'll add that back in. So really, I think rituals are very personal. I think it's not so much about what the specific rituals are, as long as they are things that people are doing consistently, regularly. And the most important thing with, I think, rituals is that it's intentional, because I think that's the difference, because people have asked often what's the difference between a habit and a ritual. And habits are just things that you kind of do automatically over a period of time, whereas a ritual is something you do intentionally, and you do that for a specific purpose. And so I think as long as people are finding things that they're doing intentionally, that's really powerful, especially in the world today where there is so much uncertainty, and rituals actually can create a little bit of certainty when it does feel like there's a lot of stuff that is out of our control.
When coming back to your accident, was there a meaning that you gave to that afterwards? So I've heard you talking about this, and so I've sort of made up, got my sort of view on what you've said. But was there a meaning that you gave to it at the time that you had to reframe? Like, I suppose you mentioned in your story that you were trying to perfect your dive. So there's clearly a sort of a positive intent in that moment. Obviously, it didn't go to plan. Did that sort of was anything about that something that you carried with you for a time, and you kind of had to undo and sort of frame it in another way? But for a period of time, it was sort of working against you, and it probably shouldn't have done. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that has shifted over time. So in the early days, I did sort of believe that it may have been a little bit of a divine intervention. I'm not a religious person, but I really felt that there could have been a bit of an element of something bigger than me that had noticed that there was, like, while I was somebody that was incredibly focused and disciplined and working really hard at those couple of big goals I had, I was also getting, I was starting to hang around with the, some not so positive influence of people. I was starting to probably, some of my behavior was probably bordering on and probably would have become a little bit more reckless. And I really see that had that not happened, that I may have thrown all of that away and just ended up, just completely pissing my life away, really, and blowing my teens. And so I do feel, and I did feel at the time that was, I'm just like, was it one or two things? Was it a divine intervention of course correction, or was it potentially a bit of punishment? And now, and considering, it's 30 years, it's been 30 years since that happened now. I've realized particularly over the last 10 years that I believe that it was an absolute gift. It was a gift for me to be able to then have a completely different perspective on life, to learn the things that I've learned, and experience all the challenges, not just the accident, but lots of other things that I've been challenged with, in the subsequent 30 years, that every single one of those experiences has been a gift, because it's then given me an experience that I can then share through story, and then a learning of what did I learn from it, and how did I turn it around? What did I take from it? And then being able to then share that with other people. So now I see that the accident was an absolute gift, in that, it's a gift of adversity, that I can then share things with people, that they can learn these things without having to go through a crisis or, great adversity themselves. Because so often people make big changes in their lives, or, resilience may become a thing through crisis. But I realize that, really it's been an absolute gift. And then every challenge I come up against, again, it's like, thank you. Thank you. It's another story, and it's more material I can use to help other people.
Yeah. So what would you say now then is your, I guess, purpose or mission in life? Have you sort of develop that? And you know, if so, how did you do it, and what would you say it is?
Yeah, I think I touched on a little bit earlier that that I really feel that, particularly from a mission or a vision perspective, is that I've realised that there's a number of reasons, the number of things that I really want to help people do, and I do feel it's my purpose. And I actually feel I feel a really deep sense of moral responsibility now to keep challenging myself, to keep learning, to keep growing and keep evolving so that I can then help others through that experience. So yeah, the big ones is about helping people to sort of look at obstacles as opportunities and problems as possibilities. Another one that I would really like people to, like, I really want to shake people with is getting people to let go of a sense of entitlement. And I think that I think an entitlement mindset is probably the biggest hindrance that anyone can have. And I feel that there's a huge element of that out there in the world. And I think that's a big one, particularly when we've been through some challenging times. There's this element that people just are always looking for someone else to save them, or someone else who's just going to give them a handout. And I think that that's been a big one. You know, particularly people look to government and thinking that government's either going to give them money, or they're going to solve their problems for them, or they're going to tell them what to do. And I just think that, you know, really challenging that sense of entitlement is really powerful. And, you know, one of my philosophies on life is that I'm grateful for everything and I'm entitled to nothing. And that's how I want to make sure that I go out and I work for what I get and I earn what I get. And I don't want to rest on that. And the other one was so the entitlement mentality. They're the biggies. And just the other one was getting people to recognize that, you know, no matter how challenging our circumstances are, that we're bigger than our circumstances. And so recognizing that we are bigger than anything that we're experiencing in this moment, and also, you know, getting people to recognize that they have the power to move through any experience, and that a lot of it comes down to a choice. And it's being able to then, you know, choose to have a better experience of something, rather than to, you know, to hand over and give up and just say, well, look, the world's against me, blame everyone. And, you know, but just recognizing that again, everything comes down to a choice. And sometimes it's just a choice of how we experience something, and we choose. I liken it that we're living and breathing our very own choose your own adventure book every single day, whether we like it or not. And it just comes down to the conscious and subconscious decisions that we make. And a lot of people look at me and they say, well, wow, you know, you're inspiring and, you know, you've done all these incredible things, but they could never do that. And that's where I've realized that there really isn't anything extraordinary about me. I haven't had resources through my journey. I haven't been handed anything. I've worked for everything I've got. I've been incredibly resourceful, and I realize that resourcefulness is such a power. Coming from nothing is a far better place to come from than coming from having resources laid on. And it's just been, you know, it's been resourceful, and it's been the decisions that I've made along the way that have led to having extraordinary experiences. And I'm no different than anyone else. Anyone can do that, but it just comes down to choosing to do that.
So you mentioned that you're not religious, but have you found that you've had some faith or belief in anything that's sort of outside of yourself when you've been through sort of any of the difficult times? Have you had to sort of, you know, has there been some sort of undescribed belief in anything at all?
Yeah, for a long time, particularly after the injury and in the lead up to the injury, I would have probably identified completely as an atheist. And even through a lot of those experiences, then I definitely didn't really identify with anything bigger. It was really the big thing that kept me going for so long was just was faith in myself. And that's still my primary driver today, is that I have an unwavering belief in myself that no matter what happens, then I'll be okay. And I have the ability and the resourcefulness to be able to get myself out of any situation and make it better than it was before. But it wasn't until I was in my 20s that I then it was through meditation. I started doing meditation classes, and then I started to realize that there definitely is something bigger than us. And so, yeah, I do now, put faith in, I sort of refer to it as the universe or my higher self. I do believe that there's definitely bigger energies than us at play. And a lot of the time that I do actually just trust that and surrender to that, and trust that, I do the work and I set the intentions, but really that the things will work out in a positive way, even if there's some challenging things that are on the path to getting to that place. But ultimately, I believe that, there is something bigger than us that has some kind of plan for us. And now I realize that, through all of those different experiences I've had, and particularly the injury I experienced, was all part of a plan for me to then be able to help others. And I sort of see myself now as a bit of a lighthouse. And, my job isn't to try and save the boats or save people or anything like that, but it's just to shine the light, and, share the messages that I do. And through that, if that helps other people, then that's amazing. But my ultimate responsibility, I feel now, is to, stay connected to, the energies, and again, just have complete trust that that things will work out, or will work out well, and that in the journey, that anything I experience that's challenging is part of my purpose now, and part of the lessons that I need to then share with other people.
Yeah. So a couple of questions before we wrap up then. If people are interested in finding out more about you, want to sort of book you to speak or anything like that, what is it that what are you up to, and how can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, look, the best places to get hold of me is LinkedIn is probably the best one to get me, or via my website, staceycopas.com. But with any of the social medias, I look after it all myself. So if anyone sends me a message, you'll get me. And I really welcome those conversations and the connections that come, particularly the conversations that come from someone that has listened to the interview. And I really always love to hear what resonated most with people. But yeah, as far as speaking goes, I'm very fortunate that I live in Sydney, and there have been opportunities now to start speaking in person. But the beautiful gift of the pandemic that we've had over the last year or so is that it's opened up the world, and conversations like that we're having here today. But also, I've been able to, I'm available to present virtually, and probably the biggest thing I've been helping people with at the moment is helping people shift their perspective on the uncertainty that we're experiencing. And the angle that I've looked at now is that, uncertainty is actually a blank canvas, and rather than seeing it as a negative thing, my perspective on it now is that when nothing is certain, anything is possible. And
I like that.
Helping people to see that now. We're in a place of incredible possibility, and if I can help shift that in people and get them to sort of get over the fear of what's going on, and get over the sense of wanting to wait for it to be over, or wait to be told what to do either by the government or by the media, then I think that's one of my favorite messages to be sharing at the moment.
Yeah, that's a great one. I think for many of us, when you're in that position of uncertainty, it kind of creates, sort of almost paralyzes you. So you can't do anything. You don't know what to do, and you don't want to do anything. And it is a difficult thing to deal with. But I like that statement, that you've just made there, because I think it, as you say, it sort of reframes things, and I suppose puts you more in power to do something, which at the moment, with generally there being not a lot of great news in the news, it's it's probably something that can serve people in a positive way. So, final question then, Stacey. Escape Your Limits is about escaping what you've believed is impossible and gone on to make it possible. We've covered a number of extraordinary things in your life, but is there an example of where you've escaped your own limits recently that you would like to share?
Wow, there's probably multiple. There's probably multiple ones here. I think I'm very fortunate to be in the most incredible relationship that I've ever had in my life. And I've been married before, I'm divorced. I spent a lot of years on my own trying to figure out what I wanted and work out that I wanted to be, how I could be a better partner. And I think I had a perspective of what was possible and the type of relationship that I could have had. So I certainly had, and that was obviously based on previous experiences and what we've seen of family and stuff like that. But what I did was I realized that I did want something more than that. I wanted to explore what was possible, and I didn't want to be limited by the experiences I already had, and I didn't want to be limited by what I'd grown up with. So I sought out the help of a coach last year. That was one of the big things in the pandemic. I shifted my priorities, and I realized I wanted to prioritize relationships in my world. Both romantic and all other relationships. So I committed to, working intensely with a coach in that area. That was started in June. And, by December I was in, a relationship that I'm in now. And I am still in awe every single day of this man and the relationship we have, because it was something that I never thought was possible, and I'm constantly astonished. So I think that's probably been one of those ones where I've definitely escaped those limits. But again, it came down to a choice, and it then came down to, seeking an expert in the space to then help me do that. And then I was able to meet somebody where I was at, and that's just been amazing. And now I sort of feel that the possibilities there are actually limitless, and that's an exciting thing.
Fantastic. Well, great story, Stacey. You didn't mention the book. I recommend. I think you can get it from Amazon. It's a very, it's a great book. It's a nice little roadmap, and there's some sort of little workshops that you can do with it as well, almost like sort of writing in some of the sections. So I'd recommend, if anyone's sort of having any challenges at the moment, it's a great book that you can kind of look at and check in and figure some of the stuff out yourself. So definitely check that out on Amazon, which is called How to Be Resilient. Stacey, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure to speak to you. Best of luck in both in your relationship and rest of what you're doing in your mission as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Matthew. It's been amazing to share with you today.
Thanks.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you did, then please go over to iTunes and subscribe to the Escape Your Limits podcast. Leave a review, leave a comment. It really would help us a lot to continue to keep these going.